Introducing the epic new Swift. Time to go swifting.
वॉचो ऐप पे देखो एक OTT के दाम पे सारे OTT शान से.
The dream that was denied at Wankhede is realized in St. Vincent. A little less than 8 months after suffering heartbreak at the ODI World Cup, Afghanistan reach utopia at the T20 World Cup. They defeat Australia for the first time in their history in international cricket and give us a monumental result to unpack. On Maruti Suzuki Arena presents ESPNcricinfo TimeOut, powered by Dish TV Watcho, where we have the company of Tom Moody. Tom joining us from Kingstown, where he saw the game from the closest quarters. Tom, thank you as always for your time. The magnitude of this result, can it be overemphasized at all, not just in terms of what it means for this competition and this group, but also in terms of Afghanistan's cricket history?
Yeah, I think if you firstly look at Afghanistan and where they've come from and how they've grown as a cricket nation over recent years, it's quite an extraordinary curve upwards, how they're competing against all teams. It's a matter of time until, they, I suppose, knocked over some of the very top teams, and Australia being one of them. And, the conditions, yes, were, very much in Afghanistan's wheelhouse, if I could put it that way, where the ball was turning, and there's a little bit of inconsistency of pace, but that's certainly no excuse or taking anything away from what was a very complete performance from Afghanistan. They were, on point really from the time that they were asked to bat first, and they looked very much the better side tonight.
Yes, there's so much to unpack from both the innings that we saw, what we saw from the Afghan top order first, and then their bowlers in limiting Australia. But before we get to that, just some of the words from Rashid Khan when he addressed the media sort of typify what it means. A, he brought up the context of that last game in Wankhede, saying that result had given me sleepless nights for a long time. Now this one will also mean a sleepless night of the opposite kind, but also stressing on the fact that cricket is the only source of joy for Afghanistan right now, which goes to show how much it just means.
It certainly does, and Rashid certainly does always bring the pride of the nation to his heart, and makes it very clear that that he, along with all his teammates, are doing it for a nation that are having their challenges, and it is a joy not only to the team that performed, but to all those supporters, both here in the Caribbean, but also back home in Afghanistan. So it is a significant moment for them, and they richly deserve it, as you quite rightly point out in the World Cup, where Maxwell pulled off the impossible. They nearly thought they had their very first win against Australia there, and it was just snatched from the jaws of victory. And tonight, really from the time they set that total of 149 to win the game, it was always going to be a challenge for Australia at that halfway point.
Yes, and almost so fitting in a way that the last ball of this game ends in the hands of Mohammad Nabi, the journeyman who's seen the entire course of Afghanistan's cricket history coming up the ranks from 2009. But you set us up. Now let's start going through this game as it unfolded. And like you said, it was the openers, Rahmanullah Gurbaz and Ibrahim Zadran, with a partnership which saw them alone make more runs than we'd seen through entire team totals, batting first in the 2 night games at Kingstown. Just to illustrate how much of a challenge it was to score and how significant that partnership was to the outcome of this game.
Yeah, firstly, I'd like to touch on the toss. I was surprised that Australia, after winning the toss, asked Afghanistan to bat purely on the basis of what we've seen at this venue in the first 3 games. Yes, we've had 2 night games and a day game. Every captain that's won the toss has elected to bowl, and every captain has been on the losing side that has won that toss. So I was a little bit surprised. We all felt as commentators and members of the media that was potentially an error at the toss, where Australia, should have put runs on the board and put Afghanistan under pressure, which is where they've lost games so far in this World Cup. But it wasn't to be. It was up to Gurbaz and Zadran at the top of the order to navigate some very tricky overs to begin with, because there's no question the ball was dancing around a bit off the seam, but also there's a little bit of inconsistent bounce with that new ball. But they seemed to sort of ride their luck to a certain extent, which you needed a little bit of that, but also take the game on. Particularly Gurbaz, charging down the wicket and taking the Australian attack on, hitting, 4 sixes in his innings of 60. And, I think it was the first time, I don't think it is the first time, and that Australia have gone for, in T20 internationals, gone for over 100 without Australians taking a wicket of the opposition. So, they broke a record themselves, this opening pair, and a foundation which was, a very strong foundation to build a formidable score.
Yeah, it is the longest Australia have ever gone without taking a wicket in T20Is, as Tom points out. And among the raft of records that Gurbaz and Ibrahim Zadran created, one is also with their 3rd century stand of this World Cup. That's a first for any pair in any T20I tournament we've ever seen. But just going further, you mentioned the start, and you saw only, 3 scoring shots in the first 4 overs. That's how difficult it was. But then they paced together the innings. How much credit do you give to the application and also the smarts we saw in terms of running between the wicket, which is something even their skipper highlighted in the press conference?
Yeah, the running was really good. And again, at times, you had your heart in your mouth, because it looked at times that they nearly sort of ended up in a disastrous run-out opportunity. I think Maxwell ended up with a couple of chances. If he had direct hits, he would have had a couple of run-outs. But they recognised, and I'm sure this would have been part of the discussion leading into this game, that those singles and also those doubles into the outfield were going to be absolutely critical, purely because this venue is not a venue that's easy to hit boundaries, whether they be 4s or 6s. So picking up those singles and getting those 2s were critical, and trying to reduce the number of dot balls is always the right recipe for when you're trying to set a total or chase a total in conditions that can be challenging. So they did that to perfection, and set themselves up absolutely beautifully to at least give them a very competitive chance at the halfway mark.
Yeah, you also brought up the luck factor, and it's important to point that out as well, because it is a partnership which has been aided by the Australian fielding to some extent. The amount of missed chances, the amount of missed fields in the game, that has cost Australia big in this match?
I don't think I've seen Australia field as poorly as what we saw tonight. They missed a couple of chances. Yes, there's a couple of very difficult chances, but just sloppy with general ground fielding. And to me, it's one thing that Australian cricketers had a lot of pride in themselves with their fielding. They normally are the standout when it comes to those 20 overs in the field, but they were off the mark in the field tonight, which was unlike them. Ultimately it cost them. Yes, you could argue that they should have chased down that total, but it was always going to be difficult, particularly when you had the balance of the attack that the Afghanistan team had when they set a competitive total.
Yeah. Towards the end of that Afghanistan batting effort, you felt as though Australia might have pulled back some runs, because 118 for no loss in 15.4 eventually ended with 148 for 6, and that included, Tom, and words are not enough to describe what Pat Cummins does, the first instance of back-to-back hat-tricks in white ball international cricket.
Well, everything he touches at the moment turns to gold, doesn't it? Quite extraordinary to think that he's got back-to-back hat-tricks. To get a hat-trick in any form of the game is quite remarkable, but to do it in a World Cup and do it in 2 consecutive games is incredible. Even though it was at the back end of the innings and the batters were all, making a great charge for, as many boundaries as possible, but still the stats don't lie. He should have picked up 4 in a row. David Warner actually dropped the 4th delivery, which would have given him 4 wickets in a row.
Yeah, that was the last of the missed chances. But Pat Cummins, this time the roles reversed. In the previous one against Bangladesh, it was the fielders who reminded him that he's got a hat-trick. This time it was Cummins telling the fielders that I've done it again. That takes us to the chase then. 149 in front of Australia, which from what we could gauge from the broadcast, a lot of you felt was always going to be competitive. Afghanistan would have known they need to start sharp, and they did. Naveen ul Haq causing some damage with the new ball, and Mohammad Nabi chipping in with the wicket of David Warner.
Yeah, it was always going to be a challenge, and losing Travis Head early in a familiar fashion. We've seen him get out to that sort of angle of delivery from left armers more often than not from over the wicket, but it was Naveen from around the wicket creating that angle and finding that gap between bat and pad, and bowled an absolute peach to knock him over. And, David Warner, I think at the time he got out, I think he only faced 6 or 7 balls, and it was right at the back end of the power play, so he had hardly really had any time to get himself set in that innings. Took on Mohammad Nabi and, found the top edge. So, once Warner and Head were gone, it was always, looking like a challenge. But then it was nearly like history was going to repeat itself with Glenn Maxwell when he came to the crease, because he, again, found the middle of the bat consistently and found the boundary when he needed to. And it nearly looked like Australia were going to pull this one out of the fire after being in all sorts of trouble, but it wasn't to be.
Yeah, that dismissal mode of Travis Head that you point out comes up quite often in this part of the world, because he has fallen, as you point out, to that particular kind of delivery from Naveen himself back in that ODI World Cup encounter as well. But Indian fans tend to remember that ball from Jasprit Bumrah, which just missed the stumps in the World Cup final. Now, as you point out, Glenn Maxwell. Now, that phase where Maxwell was, again, almost single-handedly, because there's no support. If you look through that scorecard, the second highest contribution is extras with 16. It must have got a little nervy with the flashback of nightmares for Afghanistan. So your take on how they handled that part, and why was it that Maxwell managed to operate so easily when on a night when his other batters couldn't?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think Maxwell himself would have drawn confidence from the performance, in the previous World Cup where he got that extraordinary double hundred. And he has been short of confidence, as we well know, over the last few months with bat in hand. And I think, he felt comfortable out there. He's also a good player of spin. So I think, when spin was potentially the threat, he had the answers, whether it be the traditional sweep or the reverse sweep. He always creates a bit of a headache for any spin attack. He found himself getting in on that surface. But he just didn't have the support. It was really always looking like it's down to Maxwell to keep the amount of runs in check whilst he was managing what was happening at the other end. So it certainly wasn't Australia's night with the bat in hand. The conditions were pretty much the ideal conditions you want to be playing Australia in, where they can't just stand and deliver and sort of play that sort of bullish game where they can take the game on and whether they play you down the ground or play you square of the wicket with brute force and the depth of quality they've got. Once the game is slowed down, the surface is challenging, and the ball is turning, it looks a very team.
It reached 70 for 3 were Australia at the 10-over mark. 79 left to win in the back 10. That's when Afghanistan introduced Gulbuddin Naib. And this is a bowler who's bowled just 3 overs in 10 previous T20Is this year. And then the kind of spell he has to alter the course of this game, how telling was that?
Well, it's interesting because going into this contest, you wouldn't think he would have bowled a lot, given the balance of the attack they had. They picked the additional spinner, so they had 4 spinners. They had Faruqi, they had Naveen as well. So you'd think that he'd be the last person they would call upon to bowl, because they also had Janet as well. But his accuracy, his stump-to-stump line, and his subtle change of pace was exactly the tonic that was required on that surface. And Australia were under pressure because when he came on to bowl, they were needing 8.5 and over on a surface where that was not going to be easy to do. And he wasn't the easiest bowler to hit either. So, you'd have to sort of take your hat off to Rashid Khan for, turning to Gulbuddin to have the impact that he had. And he certainly did deliver for his captain.
Yeah, so that is one part of it with Rashid going to Gulbuddin Naib. Also worth appreciating, Rashid Khan, that you would have thought, looking at the makeup of this Afghan lineup, with them adding that spinner, that they potentially went in thinking that we could have up to, a maximum of 16 overs of spin. But that recalibration to reassess and, just not go back to the spinners, worth appreciating from Rashid.
Yeah, definitely. Some good captaincy there. He sort of read the conditions. Both seam and spin was difficult on that surface. And he obviously felt that at the time, that particularly with Maxwell at the crease and Stoinis at the crease, he obviously felt that it was going to be a little bit harder for sort of that sort of top of the stumps, medium pace approach. It was going to be harder for both that pair and the remaining of the Australian attack batting lineup, I should say, to deal with. So again, thinking on his feet, and it's also a credit to the depth of quality in the Afghanistan team. They've got those options. A lot of teams don't have that depth and quality of options to turn to, but Afghanistan have got some great variety in their attack, and they drew on all those resources tonight.
Yeah, worth pointing out that Gulbuddin Naib was the 8th bowler that Afghanistan went to, and if you look through their lineup, barring the openers, everyone could have chipped in with the ball. He is featuring quite heavily in the comments that are coming through on our stream, Tom. And one of the questions is, would you consider Gulbuddin Naib's spell the best ever by an Afghan bowler in internationals?
Oh, I think that's a big call. I think there's no doubt there's a lot of celebration, and so there should be for all the Afghanistan fans, because, this is a big moment in the history of Afghanistan cricket. Beating Australia, who are a multiple World Cup winning team in both 50 over and 20 over cricket, is a massive achievement, and it's another significant stride forward for this country in the game of cricket. So, yes, it was a wonderful performance in a significant game, but I think there's been a number of pretty special spells from whether it be Rashid Khan or even Faruqi in this World Cup alone. We've got to remember he's the leading wicket taker. Yes, he's right, but he's got 15 wickets so far in this World Cup, and he's comfortably the leading wicket taker. So, yeah, there's been plenty of highlights over their journey.
Yeah, some of the questions coming in, a lot of questions on the Australian perspective, asking about the toss, which is something Tom Moody's already touched upon, that yes, it did surprise him that Australia chose to bowl first, given what we'd seen in Kingstown before this. You remember a good friend, Tom, from our timeout shows during the IPL, called Ashish Nehra, the handle called Ashish Nehra, who often used to send in...
Yeah, I certainly do.
Yes, so he is back with a congratulatory message for you. He says, I'd like to congratulate Tom Moody because his Sunrisers got Rashid and Nabi and Mujib and Faruqi. His expert guidance has helped these Afghan cricketers become more refined.
Yeah, that's very kind. Thank you very much, Ashish. But yeah, we're very lucky to firstly have Rashid and then Muhammad Nabi in the early days. But since then, we managed to have Faruqi and we had Mujib for that season. So, they're wonderful cricketers, incredibly competitive cricketers, and you could see that tonight. They play with great spirit, they play with great passion, and they're hard to beat. Particularly in conditions like this, they're going to be very, very hard to beat. So there's a couple of spectacular games coming up. The first one being obviously Australia against India in this group. It's going to be a big, big game in this group. And the next one is obviously Afghanistan, Bangladesh, which will be a huge game as well.
I love how in sync we are. You already set us up to where we need to go now. Because, as you quite rightly point out, India versus Australia in a rematch of the 2023 ODI World Cup final will now be a game that is a must-win for Australia effectively if they are to stay alive in this competition. Becomes huge.
Yeah, it does. And, India are doing all the right things at the moment. So it's not going to be an easy challenge at all. This is as big as it gets, really. You've got two very, very good sides that boast a huge amount of talent and have had some iconic clashes in the past. So this is a big one that you don't normally expect to see in a Super 8 stage. You normally expect to see this at a semi-final or a final, which we saw just recently in India. But this is, particularly for Australia, a must-win game.
And it will come, Tom, with the challenge of a quick turnaround now, because having played this night game in St. Vincent, they travel to St. Lucia where they'll play a day game. So the turnaround, you're looking at, what, just about 30 hours from this game to the next?
Yeah, massive. There's a lot of pressure on Australia because they had a quick turnaround coming to this particular contest this evening. So, again, another quick turnaround where, they'll be getting a flight mid-morning tomorrow to get to St. Lucia, get recovered, get freshened up and get ready to play in probably, their most important game in this World Cup to date. And a day game as well. And that's going to produce a different challenge to the Australian team as well, because we saw the conditions in St. Lucia be slightly different in the day than it was at night time. So that's going to, I think, if anything, going to favour India a little bit more than Australia, because the ball did look like it sort of held in the pitch a little bit and turned a little bit. And India do boast a number of world-class spinners. So not only have got to recover quickly, they've got to put today or tonight behind them as quickly as possible and put their best foot forward in St. Lucia.
Yes, that sole day game that we've seen in St. Lucia saw South Africa defend 163, low scoring by the standards that we've seen at St. Lucia otherwise in the night games. For Afghanistan, Tom, they get to stay here, which, as you had pointed out before this Super 8 group began, is a venue that could potentially suit them. They've got this one result against Australia. They will fancy themselves against Bangladesh, and if they were to get that win, there's every chance they might be in the semi-finals of a World Cup.
Absolutely. That just shows you the significance of tonight's win for them, in that they've got one more hurdle to jump, and if they have a good solid win against Bangladesh, which is, every chance that's possible, Bangladesh will also enjoy the conditions here. They'll bowl particularly well on this surface, and they've got certainly the bowling artillery to be able to take advantage of that. It's whether they can come here and adapt to these conditions as quickly as Afghanistan's, already have done and have experienced, because they've played on this surface, will be another interesting thing to watch out for. But that game's going to be an absolute blockbuster as well, because both of those teams will go hard at each other, and both will feel that they deserve the right to beat each other on the night.
Yeah, and worth pointing out that Afghanistan will get the advantage of knowing what's happened, because India, Australia play the day game, and then Afghanistan take on Bangladesh. If they'll know that if Australia have lost, or if there's a no result, a win alone is enough against Bangladesh for Afghanistan. Were Australia to win, then Afghanistan need to take care of net run rates. The margin would be around 36 runs, assuming Australia win a close game against India. More on the scenarios will be up on the ESPNcricinfo mobile app soon. On that note, Tom, I will thank you for your time. Quite late at your part, in your part of the world, having seen that game, having called that game. So thank you so much for breaking down a game of such significance for us.
Yeah, my pleasure, Yash.
All right, we will see you soon, Tom Moody. And like I mentioned, the scenarios for Super 8 Group 1 shall be up on the ESPNcricinfo mobile app shortly. So download it if you haven't already. It'll have you covered with everything you need to know about this World Cup. Big games in Super 8 Group 2 to follow. This evening sees England take on USA. They need the win there. And then in the morning for on the subcontinental clock, South Africa versus West Indies in what could be almost a knockout game were England to get the win over USA. So be sure to join us just around toss time before England versus USA this evening on Maruti Suzuki Arena presents ESPNcricinfo TimeOut, powered by Dish TV Watcher.
Introducing the epic new Swift. Time to go swifting.
वॉचो ऐप पे देखो एक ओटीटी के दाम पे सारे ओटीटी शान से।